crises can come out in many different ways. Mostly, we just return to where we were, and that's fine. Adaptive outcome of a crisis is valuable. But some are able to grow from crises. We learn a new coping skill. We develop new resources for being able to do better next time. Sadly, of course, some people come out of crises functioning a little less effectively. And that may be related to trauma, where the threat felt so overwhelming that it's maintained in the body, as Kelly was describing, and there's post-traumatic kinds of experiences. So crises sometimes can be experienced as trauma. Again, a trauma is a self-diagnosed thing in essence. I was traumatized by this event. I felt so threatened, and I'm not able to let go of it. And I was not able to cope. Crisis is similar, but it doesn't necessarily feel like a complete threat to my life or my identity. Both of them are, again, I say what is a crisis. I say what is a trauma. It's interesting to consider, and this is based on research in sociology and psychology. What are the factors for a positive outcome of a crisis, which is also related to doing well in terms of just general stress, even when we don't experience it as a crisis? The first thing that is very valuable is if we have resolved difficult situations in the past. If we have a history of overcoming crises, of getting through really tough, anxious, stressful experiences, including maybe making some meaning out of it as a result, then you are going to more likely be able to get through the next event. You build up a sense of resilience, in essence. The second one, if you believe you're going to be able to resolve a problem, even if you're overwhelmed in the short run, you have a sense of what's called self-efficacy. I have a sense I can do this. Or maybe it's faith. That would be maybe the religious, spiritual dimension of this. Okay, I'm not going to do it, but I'm going to do it with my community and my God and my spirit and whatever God has given me. That belief is a very powerful predictor of positive outcome from a crisis or a really stressful situation. And the third one is social support. We need communities. We need social support systems to get through crises. We're overwhelmed. We need help. It's pretty obvious. And that's why it's so important for us to be doing this today. I know that Kelly is talking about these kinds of things. So one way to think about what we're going through, most disasters, and some people call what we're going through in this world today as a disaster. Most disasters have a kind of a typical pattern. It's, oh no, it's coming, boom, and it's horrible, and we're going to build our lives back up. So if a tornado hits or something disastrous happens, this is the typical phase. The problem is we're not in a typical situation. We keep getting warning, threat, impact, warning, threat, impact, warning, threat, impact. That was true in COVID, and now it's true in society in different ways. The problem is we're experiencing this roller coaster of perceived threat, where the recoil phase, where you're kind of coping from what happened, becomes the anticipation of the next event, the next danger. And that instability goes to exactly what Kelly was talking about, the body. There's more stress hormones, and it overwhelms our coping systems. The result is a greater potential for crisis, trauma, especially those who've had a history of trauma. Because people who have a history of trauma may not have the coping mechanisms, especially for this strange sense of threat and not knowing what's going to happen next. It's not only an undefined threat, but the information is inconsistent. And that creates a difficulty for knowing how to understand what's going on. Our appraisal, our assessment capabilities are less effective, which increases the sense of uncertainty and lessens that sense of self-efficacy that is so important. Much less, not that we can ever have a sense of control, but even understanding things is one way that many of us have a little bit of sense of control. And so we get exhausted from adapting and trying to understand. In this cumulative, ongoing stretch, we all have habits, and those are understandable. She mentioned fight, flight, freeze. The friend is another one that's sometimes talked about. And they're often useful. I mean, every coping mechanism is useful sometimes. The problem is we get into a habit of a certain kind of reaction that may not be the best one at that moment. And when we're constantly being threatened, we just kind of habituate to one reaction. Maybe it's always we're outraged. Well, okay, that's great at sometimes, but we can't be outraged all the time. We also can't hide all the time. Many people in stressful situations regress to old habits. That's just the nature of what we do. Children, if you see children regressing to previous stage things that they've already gone through, that's a sign they're experiencing the stress of life, whether it's in the family or whatever's going around in the world. We can't avoid it. We're hardwired to focus on what's dangerous. It's really tough, this anxiety stuff. Coping mechanisms, which basically that's what this afternoon is, various kind of valuable coping mechanisms, spiritual practices, other kinds of practices. The goal is to reduce the anxiety psychologically. And which ones are adaptive now for you? Each of us is different in how we're hardwired in relationship to anxiety and situations. It's important to try to figure out which one works for you best. Some coping mechanisms have this wide range. Mature ones are anticipation, altruism, and humor. Not as helpful are denial, acting out, projection. Boy, we see that everywhere these days, don't we? Projecting anxiety on others, disassociation, and splitting, where everything's all good or all bad. But all of us who've handled crises, and I'm sure all of you have strengths. You have good coping mechanisms back there. And so when we face crises, one of the best questions to ask ourselves or someone we're caring about is, well, how did you handle this kind of situation in the past? Because remembering what you did well in the past can give you clues about the present. I think it's important to often focus more on resilience and coping more than meaning making. We will drive ourselves crazy if we spend too much time trying to make sense of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
It's important to seek community, that social support, even though community has the risks of all kinds, including polarization. It's important to double down on a community, finding community, building community. I think it's important, if we can, to try to be as flexible as possible. Flexibility, even in the chaos. And Kelly's already hinted at this, embracing the poetic, the aesthetic, and our imaginations. These are a different part of the brain that we can activate positive hormones and chemicals, as well as a different part of just who we are that provides wonderful resilience. And acting is a wonderful coping mechanism as possible. The more we're generous and the more we're compassionate, the more we sense a feeling of empowerment and kind of self-control, at least some kind of control in the situation. So these kinds of God-called activities really do make a difference in stressful times. Another thing I think it's important, at the heart of trauma and disaster and many crises is loss. This is an unusual mess we're in. And the losses are more vague. They're intrapsychic, they're relational, they're not obvious like a tornado went through. Nevertheless, lament is an important spiritual practice to reset ourselves a little bit, to occasionally stop and think, what am I losing? It's easy to think about what the country is losing, and that just increases our sense of threat. What am I losing? I'm losing a country I love. I'm losing a church because we're breaking apart because of the polarization. I'm losing my family because we can't sit down together and have a conversation about stuff. What am I losing? And lament that, name and grieve the losses, even while we look for blessings in the life. Patient with yourselves. We're grieving and we're still losing. Today is all about our tradition. And our traditions, I guess I really should say, our spiritual traditions. They promise, there's promises of grace for the present. Play, ritual, physical activity, it's about embodiment. So much of this is about the body. And so embodied practices are really valuable. And friends, take Sabbath and make that Sabbath from screens and news. It's amazing how much even an afternoon away from screens and the news can really present a renewal, especially to do something active or fun or relational or aesthetic, like write poetry or draw. So, Kelly, let's have a conversation. You focused a lot on systems and how they're often anxious. And I think that's fundamentally important. And we're all part of many different kinds of systems, family systems, our churches, our professional systems. But there's also oppressive systems out there that you hinted at one point, patriarchy, racism. And we're kind of caught in multiple systems. You were focusing on how to minister to anxious systems. I want to reverse that a little bit for a few minutes, so we can talk about some other things too. How do systems affect our anxiety? And I've been referring to a big system, our country, in essence, and how it affects our anxiety. So What are your thoughts about that?
How much time do we have?
I think we have about 7 minutes, 10 maybe. Yeah.
Such a good point. I mean, we're absolutely affected by the systems that we're operating in. And I think what's harder about that is that we can't control.
Sorry, I forgot to turn off my share.
We don't have as much control over systems that are outside of us than our own like physical system, right? And I think that I just lost my train of thought. I do think it is amazing how much one person in a system or a group in a system can affect the system.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll work with clients and they're in a family system that's really dysfunctional and unhealthy. And they're trying to figure out how to get the other people in the system to change. What we work on is the changes that they can make. And then it is amazing how that affects the system. Even when someone gets healthier, a system can get really thrown off. It's not just when a person is kind of in decline, but if a person's getting healthier, it changes the entire system.
This concept of homeostasis, that systems like to balance themselves to where they are familiar with, just like people do to some extent. And anytime you try to change, the system's going to try to change you back. And that's the problem, especially for pastors in churches. I'm going to be different than the last pastor. Well, the church has a different opinion about that. And they're going to try to push you to be the way they're used to, as families do it, particularly because you've been in there your whole life.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes it then harder to be that relatively less anxious presence. I don't like the word non-anxious because none of us are not. I say relatively less anxious.
Yeah.
So I think it's helpful to recognize also these other hidden systems like racism and sexism and heterosexism and normativity, all these kinds of things that also box us into certain expectations. And those expectations then create pressure that creates anxiety very easily. That's what systems do, is they create expectations of us, I think.
Yeah, I think that especially if someone is in a community where there's not as much diversity, I think they can be experiencing oppression and it can be very silent and feel very alone. And I think that people in privilege need to really make space, and not just make space, but invite naming and conversation and just validation of what a person or a group is going through. Because I guess I'm thinking about, working with clients in the therapy office. I might have a client come in who's a Black American, and I'm sitting there as a white therapist, and I have to name it. I just have to name what's the differences there so that it's allowed, so that the person knows that this conversation, this topic is welcome here. And I think we can play a big role in not just making a space for those conversations, but introducing them and inviting them.
Yeah, I like how you put that. It's often talked about giving voice to people. I like to think of it also in terms of empowering, because these oppressive systems want to disempower women, persons of color, persons who have different abilities, et cetera, et cetera. And how can we empower one another in these systems that want us to act in a certain way, that don't want persons like myself to give up privilege. They don't even, the systems resist that in many cases.
Systems do not want change.
That I think that can be a headline. Systems do not want change.
Mhm.
And we are in a system that is changing, I mean, nationally, just changing at a rate that can't absorb.
Mhm. That's right. And as a result, other systems are just so overwhelmed by that and are trying to push back, but are less powerful.
Mhm.
And the most powerful one wins in systems most of the time. And that's really difficult in this current situation.
I keep hearing people say that they're like putting their head in the sand, like they just are losing faith and hope that they can make any difference. And I just think that is, I both understand that people are trying to be well mentally and but also action and advocacy and courageous resistance is so important.
It is.
Yeah. So how do you do both?
But you have to do both, and it's back and forth in terms of self-care, and then do what you can.
Mm-hmm.
Do what you can. Don't try to do more than you can.
But don't do less than you
But
can.
don't do less than you can too.
Mhm.
And that's true whether it's in the church or your family or community.